We have a situation here.
He said it over a menu he had already snatched back out of the man's hands. The dining room went quiet the way a kitchen goes quiet right before something burns. A water glass sweated onto white linen. Somewhere near the bar, ice clinked once and stopped. The man in the gray jacket did not raise his voice. He set both hands flat on the table, fingers spread, like he was pressing something down that wanted to rise. His name was Marcus Bell. He was 51 years old, and the jacket he wore had a small tear at the left cuff that he had not bothered to mend. But the waiter did not know who had just walked into his restaurant, and in 11 minutes he would find out in front of everyone. Man, you already know this ain't ending well for that waiter. Let's get into it. Marcus had come to Aldridge House on a Tuesday, the slow night, the night he always chose when he wanted to sit somewhere quiet and remember his grandmother's hands. Aldridge House sat on the corner of a street lined with gas lamps that hadn't burned gas in 60 years, all brass and ivy, and a maitre de podium carved from a single oak trunk. It was the kind of restaurant that printed its wine list in a font meant to look older than it was. Marcus had grown up 4 blocks from a version of this street that had no ivy on it. His grandmother, Ruth Bell, had spent 19 years washing dishes in the back of a restaurant, not unlike this one 2 miles east, in a building that had since been torn down for condominiums. She came home every night smelling of bleach and grease, and she kept a folded dish towel from her first week of work in a drawer she never opened for anyone but herself. Marcus remembered the sound of her key in the door at 11 at night. He remembered a kerosene heater that hissed in the corner of their apartment because the landlord never fixed the furnace. He remembered a bus pass with a corner worn soft as cloth. What nobody at Aldridge House knew, and what the maitre d' certainly did not know when he waved a waiter named Trent Callahan over to handle the situation at table 11, was that Marcus Bell now held the controlling interest in Holloway Hospitality Group, the private equity fund that had quietly acquired Aldridge House 14 months earlier. Marcus had built his fortune in logistics, not restaurants, a business he started in a leased warehouse with 2 trucks and a spreadsheet he kept on a library computer, because he could not afford one of his own. He had bought into Holloway not for the money, which he did not need, but because Aldridge House was the last name his grandmother had ever mentioned wanting to eat inside, just once, before she died. Ruth Bell raised Marcus alone in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, after his mother passed when he was 6, and his father was never in the picture long enough to leave a name behind. She worked the dish pit at a restaurant downtown from 4 in the afternoon until midnight, 6 days a week, and came home smelling like bleach and grease with her knuckles cracked from the hot water. Marcus did his homework at the laundromat counter under a bulb that flickered, using a library card to check out the same 3 math textbooks over and over, because the school district couldn't afford new ones and his grandmother couldn't afford the fines when he kept them past due. He taught himself calculus, 2 years ahead of his class, from a paperback with a broken spine, working problems in the margins because notebook paper cost money he didn't have. Ruth never talked about restaurants like Aldridge House with envy. She talked about them the way you'd talk about weather on another continent, something that existed but had nothing to do with her life. Once, watching a cooking show on a secondhand television, she'd said, quiet and almost embarrassed by wanting it, that she'd like to sit in a place like that just once before she died. Not to eat anything fancy, just to be served instead of doing the serving. Marcus was 17 when she said that. He never forgot it. She died at 68, 4 years before Marcus's holding company acquired the Holloway portfolio, and she never got her wish. He built his entire adult life, in some quiet way even he rarely spoke of, around making sure nobody who mattered to him would ever again be told there wasn't room for them. Even after the warehouse became a fleet, and the fleet became a portfolio of companies most people would never hear the names of, he kept the same worn leather wallet Ruth had given him for his high school graduation. Its stitching cracked along one seam, because some things earned the right to stay close to a person no matter how far that person traveled from where they started. Nobody at that podium knew any of this. Trent Callahan certainly didn't. Trent had worked the floor at Aldrich House for 6 years, had trained the newer staff, and had a habit unremarked upon by management of seating certain guests near the kitchen doors and taking a long time to greet them. The first sign came small. Marcus arrived at 7, was told there would be a wait despite an empty room of open tables, and stood by the podium for 11 minutes while 2 white couples were seated ahead of him without reservations. He said nothing. He watched a hostess avoid his eyes and study her reservation book with unusual intensity, running a finger down a column of names that never seemed to land on his. The second sign came at the table itself. Trent approached, set down a water glass hard enough that it splashed onto the tablecloth in a dark spreading circle, and asked whether Marcus was waiting for the rest of his party, a question aimed at a single man dining alone, delivered with a raised eyebrow that made clear what he meant. Marcus said he was dining alone. Trent said, "Of course you are," and walked away before taking the order, leaving the spilled water to soak into the linen. The third sign came with the menu itself. Trent returned, holding 2 menus, handed the laminated lunch specials card to Marcus instead of the leather dinner menu every other table had received, and said the kitchen was limited tonight in a tone that suggested the limitation applied only to this table. The lunch card had a grease stain in one corner and a torn edge, as though it had been fished out from under the podium for exactly this purpose. A woman at table 9 glanced over, then looked back down at her plate. A busboy folding napkins near the wall saw the whole thing and kept folding. The fourth sign came when Marcus asked a passing floor manager, a heavyset man who introduced himself only as the shift lead for water refills and a wine list, and was told, without eye contact, that the wine list was for guests placing a full dinner order, even though the couple at the next table over, dressed no more formally than Marcus, had been handed one without asking. The shift lead moved on before Marcus could respond, already refilling glasses at a table 2 seats away, his back turned in a way that felt deliberate. The fifth sign was the loudest, when Marcus asked, evenly, whether he could see the same dinner menu as the rest of the room. Trent's voice rose to fill the dining room on purpose. "Sir, I don't know what you're used to, but this isn't that kind of place," he said, and reached across the table to take back the lunch card Marcus had barely touched. That was when he said the line about calling someone who actually wanted him there. That was when the room went silent. Marcus's hand did not clench into a fist. It pressed flat against the tablecloth, and for 1 second his fingernails left 4 small crescent marks in his own palm, beneath the table, where no one could see them. He thought of his grandmother's dish towel folded in that drawer. He thought of the bus pass. He did not raise his voice. "I'd like to speak with the owner," Marcus said quietly. Trent laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "The owner doesn't come out for every complaint," he said, "especially not this kind." At table 6, an older couple who had been celebrating an anniversary looked at each other and said nothing. At the bar, a young server named Priya Osei watched the exchange with her jaw tight, remembering 3 prior nights when Trent had done something similar to a delivery driver, a family with an accent, a man in a wheelchair who'd needed a booth moved. She had reported none of it because the last time a complaint like that reached management, the complainant had been the one moved to a different shift. Yo, that line about the owner not coming out, that's about to age real bad for him. Let's see how this plays out. Marcus took out his phone. He did not call security, and he did not raise his voice. He typed a single text message to a woman named Dana Whitfield, the general manager of Holloway Hospitality Group, who had personally walked Marcus through this location 8 months earlier during due diligence, and who kept his direct line saved under a name that read, simply, Chairman. Dana arrived within 9 minutes, which meant she had already been 3 blocks away reviewing quarterly numbers with the site's finance director. She did not knock. She walked straight through the dining room in a gray suit, past the podium, past the maitre d' who straightened instinctively the moment he saw her, and stopped at table 11. "Mr. Bell," she said, "I am so sorry. Is everything all right?" The room did not go quiet this time. It went dead silent, the specific silence of 40 people recalculating everything they thought they understood about the last 11 minutes. Trent's face changed in stages. First confusion, because he did not recognize the woman. Then recognition, because he had met Dana Whitfield exactly once at a mandatory staff meeting 6 weeks earlier, when she had introduced herself as the general manager overseeing all 4 Holloway properties. Then the third stage, the one that mattered, when the maitre d' whispered something in his ear that made his face go the color of the tablecloth. "That's Mr. Bell," the maitre d' said. "He owns the group. He owns this restaurant." Dana did not wait for Trent to recover. She pulled her phone from her jacket pocket and turned the screen toward the small crowd that had gathered near the bar, the way people gather near an accident they can't look away from. On the screen was a still frame from the restaurant's own security footage, pulled by the shift manager the moment Dana had received Marcus's text. It showed Trent taking back the lunch menu, the timestamp glowing in the corner. Below it, on a second screen she had already opened, sat 3 prior complaint emails from the last 2 years, filed by guests whose descriptions matched patterns the corporate office had marked, each time, as resolved, no further action needed by a floor manager who had since been promoted. The evidence had been sitting in a folder for 14 months. Nobody had connected it until tonight. "You've done this before," Dana said, not as a question. "I was just following protocol for parties that seem—" Trent started and stopped because there was no ending to that sentence that would survive being said out loud in a room full of witnesses. "Parties that seem what?" Dana said. The maitre d' who had waved Trent over in the first place suddenly discovered urgent business at the reservation podium. The busboy, who had kept folding napkins, set the stack down and did not pick it back up. Dana turned to the room. "This restaurant is owned by Holloway Hospitality Group," she said, loud enough to carry to every table. "Its majority partner is Mr. Marcus Bell, who is sitting at table 11, and who has been treated tonight the way this staff member has apparently treated other guests for 2 years, according to our own internal records, which I am looking at right now." She turned back to Trent. "You're suspended, effective immediately, pending termination review, and you're going to apologize to Mr. Bell before you leave this building tonight." Trent's jaw worked for a moment before anything came out. When it did, it was small, almost swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said. "You were determined. I didn't realize who you were." The apology hung in the air, thin and reluctant, exactly as inadequate as it sounded. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. He did not smile. He did not raise his voice. "You didn't need to know who I was," Marcus said. "You needed to treat me like a person. That's the part you got wrong, not the ownership." He stood, buttoned his jacket over the torn cuff, and walked out without finishing his water. Nah, that lime right there. He didn't even need the reveal to win, and that's exactly why it hit so hard. The suspension became a termination within 72 hours. After Dana's internal review, surfaced 2 additional complaints that had been buried under the same resolved label. One from a delivery driver, and one from a family of 4, celebrating a christening, who had been seated, without explanation, at a table facing the kitchen's swinging doors. The floor manager who had signed off on those resolutions, a man named Craig Doyle, who had worked at Aldrich House for 11 years, was demoted out of management and transferred to a location 2 hours outside the city, where he worked the same shift he'd once assigned to people he deemed beneath a good table. The shift lead, who had refused Marcus the wine list, was quietly let go the same week, once security pulled a pattern of similar refusals stretching back 18 months. Corporate rewrote its guest complaint escalation policy within the month, mandating that any complaint involving discriminatory treatment be reviewed personally by a regional director within 48 hours, a policy that Holloway's 4 other properties adopted by the end of the quarter. Every property manager in the group was required to complete a new training program built around the recorded footage from that Tuesday night. Footage that Dana insisted be shown in full, without edits, so that new hires would understand exactly what the policy existed to prevent. The hostess, who had studied her reservation book so intently that night, was not fired. She came forward, 2 weeks later, on her own, to admit she had been told by Trent months earlier to manage the room a certain way, and she became one of the case's more reluctant but honest witnesses during the internal review. Trent Callahan did not find work in fine dining again. Word traveled through a small industry the way it does, quietly and completely. His fiancée, who had been planning a wedding at a venue 2 Holloway properties over, called it off 8 weeks later, citing, in a message a mutual friend later described to Priya, a loss of trust that had nothing to do with menus. Priya Ose, the server who had watched 3 prior incidents and said nothing, came forward during the internal review with a written account of what she'd witnessed, with the wheelchair guest and the family with the accent. She was promoted to assistant floor manager within the year and became the person new hires were sent to for training on service standards. She kept, framed above her desk in the break room, a printed copy of the new escalation policy, with the date it was signed. Marcus did not sue. He did not need to. Instead, he asked Dana to redirect the restaurant's entire quarterly community outreach budget, plus a personal contribution of his own, into something new. The Ruth Bell Hospitality Scholarship, funding tuition and paid apprenticeships for young people from the neighborhood where his grandmother had once washed dishes for 19 years, training them not as servers, but as future managers and owners. The first plaque, small and brass, was mounted inside the entrance of Aldrich House 8 months later. It read simply, "In memory of Ruth Bell, who never got to eat here, and in honor of everyone this door is now open to." 3 years later, Marcus brought his grandmother's dish towel, the one she had kept folded in a drawer for decades, and had it framed beside the plaque under glass. He ate dinner in that dining room once a month, at the same table by the window, and nobody at Aldrich House ever again asked whether he was waiting for the rest of his party. The Ruth Bell Hospitality Scholarship funded its first 7 apprentices within a year, teenagers from the same blocks where Ruth had once caught the last bus home, smelling of bleach. They didn't start as servers. They started in a 6-month rotation through every department of the restaurant group, from kitchen operations to guest services to the back office side of the business. Marcus understood better than anyone, so that by the time they finished, they knew the entire machine, not just one gear in it. 2 of the original 7 now managed their own Holloway locations. One of them, a young woman named Keisha Odom, sat in the chair across from a 19-year-old applicant last spring and asked her the same question Dana had once asked at table 11, though this time it wasn't an accusation. She asked what she wanted to be treated like when she walked through a door like this. 1. Priya still tells new hires the story during onboarding, not to embarrass anyone by name, but because she says every server needs to understand what's sitting in front of them before they decide how to treat it. She keeps a photo on her phone of the first scholarship class, 7 kids in white shirts, grinning outside the restaurant on their first day of training, and she shows it to anyone who asks why the policy changed. She also keeps, taped inside her locker where only she sees it, a printout of Trent's final line, the one about Marcus being determined, because she says it reminds her what the bare minimum of decency sounds like when someone is finally forced to say it out loud, and why the bare minimum was never going to be enough. Marcus never spoke publicly about that night. He gave no interviews, issued no statement, and declined 2 offers to appear on local news segments about the incident. The only trace of it that he kept for himself was the framed dish towel by the entrance and a single photograph taken quietly by Priya on the day the plaque was mounted of an empty chair pulled up to table 11, angled slightly toward the window, as if someone were about to sit down. This story is fiction. We built it from patterns that show up again and again in real life, the kind of quiet cruelty that hides behind a menu, a podium, a uniform. It isn't a transcript of one night. It's a mirror of 100 nights that actually happened to real people who never got a camera, a reveal, or an apology. Most of those nights ended with the guest going home and saying nothing, because saying something had cost people like Ruth Bell their jobs before, and everybody in that dining room's orbit, deep down, already understood the math on that. So here's the question, and we want you to sit with it for a second before you scroll away. If you were sitting at that table, and nobody in the room said a word, would you have been the busboy who kept folding napkins, or the one who finally looked up, put the towel down, and said something? Tell us in the comments. Like this video if you believe accountability shouldn't need a title to arrive before somebody gets treated like a human being. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it today, and subscribe, because we've got more stories like this one coming. and we're not slowing down anytime soon.